Hello and welcome to the mountain. Today we're going to be taking this Norco Sight. We're going to tear the front fork off. We're going to pull all the linkage apart. We're going to replace the bearings. We're going to give it a basic tune-up and get it back to the customer. Thanks for watching. Go ahead and remove the crankset. Okay, brake. Together from this side. 8mm. Okay, so we have all the linkage torn down, loose now. We're going to go ahead and start pulling apart, making note of where the spacers are located. There's going to be some spacers in here, so we're going to make note of where they're located. On the inside there's a thicker spacer, on the outside there's a thinner spacer. So just go ahead and stick those on the bolts here in the orientation that they came off. I'm going to set that aside. Same for over here. Thin spacer on the outside, thick spacer on the inside. So, outside, inside. We'll clean all that up before we install it. We'll put some fresh Loctite on there. Alright, we can go ahead and pull this top linkage off. Seat stay. This unit has equal size spacers on both sides. And we'll put those back together and set that aside as well. I'm actually going to stick that back through the linkage here for a moment. Let me go ahead and put the bolt back on there. Actually, I'm going to put this back in the orientation it belongs. And we'll have this off soon enough to clean it as well. Okay. We'll pull this other side off. That needs to be a little bit looser. Catch my little spacers. This will all get thoroughly cleaned out before it's assembled again. Alright, my main lower pivot bolt, move that. Again, we're going to have some spacers, and also we're going to be running this cable back through here, which we'll have to reinstall. I may install a whole new cable, but I do need to pull this through here so that I can work on this unit. This cable actually, it's definitely, the housing's definitely going to get replaced because it's all chewed up right here at this spot. That should be a pretty straightforward routing. I believe there's only one, there's just a thin channel to go through there, so that'll be really easy to reinstall. So here's my lower swing arm. I've got these two bearings here to replace, and they don't feel terrible, but the customer does want them serviced, so we're going to go ahead and replace these guys. Inspecting this side, these bearings also don't feel terrible, but we've got it apart. We're going to go ahead and replace it. These don't feel good at all. That doesn't feel great either. So these are double bearings. There's two bearings in either side here, so we're going to need to use a bearing puller to knock those out of there. And the same for the top here. So there's double bearings, top and bottom. That goes in that orient of our chain stays, or our seat stays rather. And then at the top here we have a single bearing. So we've got 8, 9, 10, and then we're going to have additional bearings up here. We're going to have two bearings up here, so it's 11, 12. Let's put that back on there a little better than that. We're going to lose our pieces. So that'll be the basic job. We're going to clean it up, put it back together. There also may be 2 bearings down here in the bottom. I don't think there are. There are not bearings there. This does not have any little spacers in the bottom here, so we could have technically left that together for now, but we do want to clean that up. That's a little bit too difficult to twist with my fingers. And same scenario as before. A couple of spacers back behind here. And these are the same width, I believe, on both sides. Yes, on this bike they are the same width. You can see all that grime in there. That's what we're going to be taking care of as well. Stick one of those there. One there. Put that back through there. And stick our appropriate bolt on there. So now we just have these 2 bolts removed. These are separate from one another. It seems to be in there a little tighter than the other side. You use just a little screwdriver to slightly pry that out of there, pop that out of place. Catch my spacers. They're actually stuck in there pretty good. Just use a little screwdriver to push through there. Tap that out on the other side. A little flat screwdriver. Okay, there's our little inside. It's actually not a spacer, it's just the more of a bushing, I guess, than a spacer. And that one came out much easier. Go ahead and just thread these back together. And that one's really snug to go on there, so that really needs cleaned up. There's a little bit of Loctite on the actual bolt here that is preventing it from turning properly, so that'll be cleaned and greased before it's reinstalled. And here's my other one, and this one, well, that one's also rather tight as well. Okay, so here's our main linkage bit. Again, that was in this orientation right here. So we've got single bearings, and no bearings in the back. So we'll go ahead and get started removing these guys for you. Okay, there are a number of different ways to remove these bearings. I've seen a lot of different methods on the internet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with these guys, and I'm going to basically pull them out. So I'm going to use just a standard bearing puller here. I'm going to find the appropriate, I believe these are 6,000 and, what are these? 6,001s, what does that say? That says, actually I think that's a 6,002, I can't really read it. Maybe that'll help. .6062, so we'll find the appropriate there's 6062, I think that's what it is. Indeed, that is the correct bearing. Actually, we need to use a slightly smaller one because we're going to be pulling it from the other side, but I'll set this aside so we can reinstall the new bearings. There are little detents on the inside here that you could pound those out, I believe, but we're not going to do that. We're going to put a 6,000 bearing puller, or press in there, rather. Actually. And then I'm going to use a large enough piece of aluminum here that I'm going to run this through. Actually, I'm going to use a different one than a 6,000. How about this? Nope, that's too large. We're going to use this 6901, I believe it is. Stick it out right there, put this on here, wrap this guy down. And we're not really worried about saving these bearings because they are getting replaced, and I don't ever reuse old used parts. Okay, so there's my basic setup. I'm going to grab my appropriate size ratchet, which I don't see a ratchet, so I think that's a 10, but it could be an 11. It is a 10, and then we'll just twist that out. And that's going to press that bearing right out of there without damaging anything. You could also use a piece of PVC on the other side, but this soft aluminum here is not going to mark up my surface. Make sure that's centered. I'm going to get a ratchet for that. Make our process a little quicker. Okay, there's one bearing removed. You could do this yourself with a socket that was the appropriate diameter, but you don't want to have anything that's going to chew up that finish. You want that to stay nice. You could actually put a little tape around your surface here to give that a little bit of extra protection. And there's one bearing removed. We'll repeat the process. Make sure that's centered. There's 2 bearings down. I need a smaller press to go through here. We also can use a smaller piece here. We're going to use, what are we going to use? That's not going to work. I'm going to use a smaller aluminum spacer here. It's important that it sets the whole way around so that you're not pulling it out at an odd angle. Center that up. Cinch it down a little bit. And back to our ratchet wrench. Bearing number 3. My spacer actually slipped off there, so we'll put that back on the edge. Always better to go a little slow instead of damaging your components. Okay, so all 4 bearings of our main little pivot linkage bit here have been removed. We just need to clean all this out really good, make it nice and I wouldn't say shiny, but definitely get rid of all that gunk that's in there. Set these bearings aside, and we'll move on to the more challenging units. We're going to start with this side. This again has double bearings, so we're going to need to use a different tool to remove these. We use a Wheels Manufacturing bearing puller. Find one that fits in there, it's the right size. Unless it's at a different location, which would be not ideal. Okay, that's the one we need. So I need to loosen this up. That's a little boogered up from some previous work. And this is the, I don't know what number it is. Does it have a number? It does not have a number, but I will put a link in the description for whichever puller this is. So I just loosen that up, and that allows this to spread back out. It's going to need a little tap. So now this should set right down in there very well. And I only want to catch half of the bearing. I don't want both bearings. I just want one of the bearings. They are both going to pound out that direction, but we don't really want to do both at the same time. That just seems like that would be a little bit more difficult. Now I could use the same pulling method as before, where I could just take this and just pull both of them out, and maybe we'll try that on the other end here. But we're going to go ahead and do this. Stick that back in there. And this expands out when I tighten it, so it catches the inside of the race. And then I'm going to find myself a slightly longer piece of pipe. That's big enough that the bearing will in fact fit down into. That's not the same size, that is the same size bearing. Then we're going to stick this in there. I'd like to support this with something. Lacking anything obvious, I'm just going to use my little bearing box. Oh, that doesn't quite work. That works good there. So now I'm going to take a punch and a hammer and just loosen that spacer up, or that bit up there. That goes right in. You can see there are little detents here that you could use a punch to punch those out, but I'm not going to do that. Make sure this collet's nice and tight so they can't slip out of there. Okay. I was only catching the front bearing, not the rear bearing. And it pulled right out. So, well, these tools do work great. We're going to go ahead and just pull this out the same way we pulled the first one out. So stick that on there. And again, this could be done with a bolt and a socket, a couple of sockets, a socket large enough to fit around the outside here, and a socket small enough to fit through the inside. I'm using a piece of PVC here. It's not to mar up my paint job at all. And actually that's a little bit smoother method. So that pulls that right out of there. So let's move these out of the way, these tools. So we've got this set up again just as previous, and we're just pulling both of these bearings out at the same time. Okay, there they are, removed nice and clean. Two more bearings. Now this one will be a little bit trickier. These bearings press in, one presses in from the outside, one presses in from the inside, and there is either a spacer or a lip built into the frame. I'm not sure, I don't recall. So this one I definitely do not want to use that method. I would like to use a blind, or use a puller to pull that out of there, versus using this method that I'd been using previously. So we'll set that aside. Loosen this guy back up. free, so that will fit inside of there. And we only want it to go in as far as halfway. Stick this back in there to hold that in place. Double check. Yep, that's where I want it to be. Okay, for this end, we've got 2 bearings pressed in here with a spacer in between them. So I cannot pull this out with good conscience because there may be a lip there that you would damage. So I want to pull these bearings out, at least this first set, one out of this side, one out of that side. And then if I determine that it's just a straight through deal with the spacer, then I could in fact potentially use the same method we were using before. But all right, so we may have lost the little bit of footage there. I just wanted to show you this this swing arm here. This is the drive side chainstay. The back, the bearings can be pulled out both at the same time from behind. The front has a lip on it that you absolutely cannot do that. And then there's going to be a spacer that goes in between there. So you're going to need a tool like this that pulls that out. We're going to set that aside and we'll show you that process on the other chainstay. Loosen this up. And typically I'm going to have to give that, oh, that pulled right off. So there's the spacer that goes between there. So we'll set that aside. We'll put that right there. Okay, we're back. We needed to charge our battery a little bit. We've gone ahead and cleaned up most of the frame and the components here. We've got to just remove these last couple of bearings. We're going to go ahead and pull these out as we've done before. Okay, that's our last bearings out of the chainstays removed. For this, now we just have the seat stay bearings to remove, the main pivot bearing in the front. And I'm going to clean this up a little bit, and then we put her all back together. Get all that gunk out of there. Off the back. And she's nice and clean. Same for the front. So set that aside. Our last 2 bearings are these guys, which will be pretty simple, straightforward to remove as well. Remove these 2. This might actually be a little trickier. Nope, it's going to be just the same. Through here, through there. Make sure that fits in there. That does. Actually, that's a little bit snug. So we're going to go with a slightly smaller unit. Actually, I could use one of these bearings. Nope, can't use one of those bearings. Oh, this guy right here, that's a 608. Line that up. And tighten it down. So we need to use our little aluminum press. This is this piece of PVC is just slightly too small. the other side. Okay, so these tools will be no longer needed at this juncture. Put that back in there. Put that aside. These aside. Okay, clean out the inside here. That side looks good. Now I'm going to put a really thin layer of grease inside of here before I repress my bearings in as well. Not very much at all, just a super thin smear, just to keep things in there nice and quiet. Okay, so there's our chainstay, or our chainstay removed. We go ahead and prep up our each of our pivot bolts here. I'm going to put a little drop. Okay, it's Loctite 243. We can't really see that. That's what it is. Okay, we're going to use a little Loctite 243 on each one of the bolts here. We're also going to put a little grease on any of the places where it's going to pivot. We're going to smear a little bit of grease around each of the bearing races, and we're going to install the bearings. Just a drop right there. Set that aside for a moment. Drop right there. Final 2 bits. Okay, so all of our bolts are set up with a little Loctite on them. Put that away. I think we'll start our reassembly with the linkage bit. Again, just a really thin smear of grease on each one of them. I will wipe off any excess off the back before I reassemble it. Take a little bit off of there and put that over there. Go ahead and get these guys while I've got the grease out. My finger's a little greasy. Chainstay. Most definitely I should have gloves right now on versus them sitting here in this box on the floor. And these guys here. Okay, that's pretty well done. Now we'll go ahead and get these pivot bolts. Pull this off of here. Over here. Looks like we're about out of grease. Again, we don't need a bunch on there. Take some of that and use it on some of the other bolts. Set that aside. I do want to keep my orientation for my bearing or my washers intact. I'm not putting grease on the threads. These guys in particular, they were the ones that were tight. That feels way better. Oops. Shock bolt. And my other pivot bolt. Okay, that'll do it for the grease. Now we need to locate our appropriate bearings. I believe these are 6901s. They are ENDURO Max suspension bearings, and they are 6901. I need a whole slew of these. There's one. Make sure these are all the correct. That's a 6902, 6900. 6902. Don't need those bearings. How about these guys? 6901, 6901, 6901, 6901, 1. Get this stuff out of the way. So we need 10 of these. 2, 4, 6. No, we only need 8 of these, it looks like. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then we're going to need 4 of the other bearings, which are the larger size, 6901. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then the 6902s, 1, 2, whoops, that's not the right size bearing. 3, nope, that's not the right bearing either. Okay, so we've got a couple of extra of those, couple extra of those. And here are my other 6902s. $69.02. Alright, we'll gather up all the customer's old bearings, stick them in this bag. $69.02. Again, you could use a socket for this, but I'd prefer to use the right tools. I have the right tools, so it would be silly to not use the correct tools. Okay, place that in there, that in there, and then this guy, I'm going to put it in, hold it on there backwards. I'm going to take one of my arms off of here so that almost fits. I don't think it does quite fit. So let's go about that in a different method. How about, well, how about we use one of the old bearings to press against the back. Stick that on there, put that in there. We have our new bearing here, an old bearing in the back, which is not going to do anything. I'm going to go ahead and stack this out a little bit so I don't have to thread it as far each time. That's my 6902. Keep him aside. Okay, it's really crucial that we start this off square. Let's make it down a little closer. Make sure that that bearing is going in there perfectly flush. That off, pull my bearing out, open up the new bearing, and repeat. And make sure we're nice and square. That's my old bearing. We'll go ahead and do these two small guys in the front here. That's my 6001. That's the wrong bearing we opened, so we'll put that aside. And press that in nice and straight. Next one. Okay, there's our main linkage pressed together. Okay, there's our main linkage assembly reinstalled. Our bearings in there. We're going to go ahead and move back to the chainstays, and we're going to do the double bearings here, where we've got one on either side. I'm going to go ahead and press in a single to start with. My 6901 again. Find my other 6901. Press this guy in. Could use a guide on this side. Okay, we're just going to put that in that side. That way this definitely is going to go in there super straight. Could install my handle again if I wanted. Okay, nice and flush. Put a little spacer in there. I want that to stay centered. That's a little tricky. bearing. Press. Where are they? I'm going to stop before this bottoms out and make sure that my bolt is in fact in the right location, or my spacer's in the right location. It looks pretty centered to me. Let's make sure this guy goes through there no problem. And we'll press him the rest of the way together. Okay, nicely installed. Up to the front. We're going to do these one at a time. Making sure that they are pressing in straight. This, I believe, will be the trickiest one to do. Okay, we're pressed all the way in. Now we'll put its partner in there. And we'll stick a guide bit in the back. Yeah, there's one chainstay completed. Pressed all the way in, nice and flush, looks great. Flip that around, that right there. Get rid of these old papers. She's nice and square. Okay. Looks like we're looking good there. Looks like we need 2 more bearings. Lucky for me, I have 2 more bearings. Spacer. Verify. Put our bolt through there. Right through there, perfect. Cinch that up. Okay, chainstay number 2. Or seat stay rather, number 2. Alright, the last 2 bearings. We're going back to our larger bearing. That's the 6902 and the 6902. This, oops, is it a 6902? It is. And put this back together. Gather up all my little bits. And that will do it. Our bearings have all been installed. Now it's just to... Okay, I'm going to go ahead and replace this cable before I go any further. I'm going to leave the wire intact. We've loosened up the little holder there. I'm going to pull the housing. I'm going to hook this first. That's not actually hooked, it's taped together. We'll untape that. Push this through. We're going to leave the wire inside. Use that as a guide to push the new piece of housing back in. We go ahead and cut this down. Okay, I've run the wire back through, the housing back through, pull that up so that it's all even. Okay, we're going to go ahead and put these frame components back together. We're going to start with our main linkage bit here. One spacer on either side. turn this around so we can see this a little better. I'm going to put everything together loosely at this point. So mount our shock. This does have a direction that it goes through. We're just putting everything on here rather loose at this time. We're going to go ahead and torque everything at the same time after it's all been reassembled. Throw our little swing arm on here. Little trick here: if you bend the housing a little bit, that will allow it to find its way up through the guide in the back, the hole coming out. Oops, missed it that time. There we go. This goes up on top. Like so. Spacer on either side. Line that up. And this one gets the nut on the other side. That's an 8mm. And an 18. We're going to use a crescent wrench. Okay. one thin spacer on either side. Okay, we've got 2 spacers, one on either side. They are the same same width. We're going to hold those together in place while we slide this in. And as we do that, as soon as we get to where we can put something through, we will stick a, what are we going to put through here? We're just going to use a little Allen wrench that we have handy here, just to hold those in place temporarily. Definitely a little trickier than the rest of them. Okay. Now they're in place. One is. There's the other one. We've got our little nut for the backing here. That started. We're going to take the first spacer. We're going to stick the first spacer in the hole. We're going to start the bolt just a little bit past it. We'll stick the arm up onto there. And then we'll drop the back one in with our finger to catch it in the back. It would be better if I was looking at it so I could actually see what was going on. There we go. Lined up. Take our rear nut, put that on there, and start that guy threading in. All right, now before I put the rest of this together, I'm going to take a clean towel, and I'm going to wipe off a little bit of grease that I've got on this from handling the pivot bolts. It'll be a little bit easier to clean it while it's not assembled. Some down here as well. Right there. All right, looking good. Okay, as you recall, we've got the fatter nut or fatter spacer going on the inside. We're going to hold that in position. That actually drops into place. And as we're holding the outside one so it doesn't drop down, we'll line that up. We're holding a little pressure against this side towards me. Oops, there goes my bolt. Not ideal. I'll wipe that off a little bit. Okay, we're holding a little pressure to the outside so that this inside spacer doesn't fall out of position. And we'll stuff that guy right through there. We'll do that process again over here. Lifting it up, putting the fatter spacer on the inside. Taking the thinner spacer, putting that on the outside. Use a tool to line that up. And right inside it goes. Okay, so our linkage has been put back together. We're going to go ahead and refer to the tech manual so we can make sure that we assemble this or tighten these down in the proper torque, to the proper torque and in the proper order. Okay, we're going to start with the main pivot bolt. Then we're going to do the shock bolt upper, the shock bolt lower, then the lower pivot bolt, then the rear chainstay, and then the upper chainstay. So our first torque is going to be 12 Newton meters. We're going to need a 5mm and an 8mm for that. The shock bolts are both 8mm, or 8 Newton meters rather. The chainstay to front triangle, which is the lower pivot bolt, is 14 Newton meters. So we need 12, 8, 8, 14. This is our first bolt. We're going to set our torque wrench to 12 Newton meters. There is Loctite on these, as you recall. There we go. That's proper torqued. Put this next one down to 8, and that's going to be our shock bolts, upper and lower. We're going to go up to 14. That'll be our lower pivot, our chainstay pivot rather. We're going to set our tool to reverse, since we're actually holding the nut while we're twisting the inner bolt into it to tighten it up. $14. Okay. Then we've got our rear bolts on the bottom, the seat stay to chainstay connectors, which are listed at 8, as well as the link arm to seat stay. So both of those are going to be 8. Put that back to the right direction, the correct direction rather. And the top are 8 as well. All right, that all feels good. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put some zip ties on the unit. Get all the actually I need to reattach this linkage bit, or this guide. This screws into the bolt on the lower shock link. This is a 3mm Allen wrench. Get that started. And this is not going to be very tight at all. The neighborhood of one Newton meter probably. Just a guide. We do have an additional guide on this side. And right about 1 Newton meter, not very tight at all. Okay, our next step is going to be reinstalling the rear derailleur, the rear brake, and then the crankset. We have run a new cable through here. Cable ferrule on the end of there. This particular one goes down through the notch and comes back towards us. I'm actually going to crimp a cable end on there before I do that. Let's see if I can find my cable ends. There they are. I'm going to grab a little set of needle nose pliers. Make sure my shifter is all the way shifted out to the highest gear. Run this down behind. Little plate. Need to loosen that a tiny bit. And then it comes up. Easier said than done. If this was out of the way, that would be a little easier. Ouch, don't want to do that. Hold that with my leg, pull this plate out, wrap that around, and pull it up. Make sure that's taut, but not pulling it too tight so that it changes the adjustment. And then we unfortunately don't have the appropriate wrench in our hand. Okay, so we've wrapped the cable down around the plate, and then it pulls back up, and then we'll cinch that guy down. And then we'll let that back up. Now our rear derailleur has been installed. Okay, we're going to go ahead and mount this rear brake. We're going to clean it up a little bit. It's difficult to clean these once they're mounted on the bike, so we'll just wipe the bottom of this brake down. Take a look at the brake pads. The brake pads look like they're in fine shape. Let's get some of this dirt off of here. You never want to use a spray cleaner of any sort to clean your brake. You just want to wipe them off with a clean rag or a towel. But we'll go ahead and reset the pistons. Just give a little piston press made by Park Tools. Just put that in there. Just gently press that up. Make aligning the brake a bit easier. We're going to snug these down, but not so that they're tight, so they can still move back and forth. Okay. Now it's time for some zip ties. We'll need 1, 2, 3, 6 it looks like. 5 zip ties. Just to press back there. Now we have a couple over on the other side. The inside. And we'll use one up here to hold the two cables together. Actually, I don't know that we will. Yeah, sure, we'll do it right here. Look how that looks. Now we're going to trim off all the ends. We're going to trim those as close as we can. Left-handed, apparently. so it's going to be a left-handed trim. Roll those down. That way they won't catch the rider's leg when he's riding. All right. Straps. Zip tie up there. Pull back. And we'll install the back wheel. This guy is listed at 10 Newton meters. And that looks like that's a 6mm. Now to align the brakes, sometimes folks will say that you can just squeeze the brake caliper or the brake lever and that will center the brakes. I find that doesn't usually work, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with that. Then we'll give the wheel a spin. And while it seems like it may have done an okay job, it's really not. It's not really centered. It's off-centered just a bit, which I don't believe you can actually see very well from where I'm filming at. So I'm just going to look down inside there. I can see it's much closer to the outside here. So I'm going to loosen one bolt at a time. I'm going to push that over so that I can see light on both sides. And I'll go to the other end. And I will repeat that process. Give that a spin. I don't hear any dragging whatsoever. I actually think I went a little bit too far in the back here. Or not quite far enough, rather. Okay, we're torquing that down to 7 Newton meters. And we'll just go back and squeeze the brake once or twice. There we go. There's a little bend in the disc. We'll go ahead and we'll straighten that up slightly. Our rotor's alignment tool. Just give that a little bend right there. And a little bend right there. From this angle, I can see better that it does need, in fact, still a slight adjustment on the, let's just lay that down. It does need a slight adjustment on the front to center that up a little bit more. So I'm going to loosen that back up. Give that little push over. And tighten that back to the right torque. Okay. Now the last thing we want to do is we want to install the crankset. I'm going to put a little thin layer, super thin layer of grease on this unit. Most importantly, around these ridged connector bits that keeps your crank from creaking. If you put too much grease on here, it'll all just end up pushing out right here in the back anyway. There was a spacer attached to the back side of this crank. Make sure we put that back in the right orientation. Don't hit things like that with your hand. Use a rubber mallet, please. You should always use a rubber mallet. You should not just pound this in with your hand. Just gently tapping that so that she's all the way in there. Install my left crank arm. Go ahead and pull this sticker off the back of here. I don't like the way it's flapping. That's a inspected by number. And there's a safety tab. We need to push the safety tab down. It's locked in place, so that keeps the crank arm from coming off. And then we're going to torque this up to 12 to 14 Newton meters. We're going to do this alternatively, one side and then the other. Oh, before we do that, we actually need to spin in the little locking or the little adjustable cap. And this doesn't get very tight at all, just to hold it in, or not to really even hold it in place, just to take the slack out of the crank. There is a tool for that. I don't see my tool laying here, so I'm going to improvise. And I'm going to use a quick stick, throw that in there, and just sort of twist that, and that will be enough to get that to cinch down to where it's supposed to be. Where is that tool at? Aha! There's the proper tool. So let's give that. The quick stick wasn't good. So here's the tool. We tighten this down. It's only about 1 Newton meter, 1.5 Newton meters. Not super tight. You don't want to twist it too tight for sure. And then we take our torque wrench, set to 12 to 14 Newton meters, and we alternate tightening these bolts. I'm just going to run our chain back through here. We are going to use some new connector links. These typically are only used for one time. This chain is pretty dirty. I'll clean it once it's on the stand, or once it's back on the bike, when I finish the adjustment for the gears for the customer's tune-up. These are directional chains. So you want the writing to be facing out towards you. Kind of in the way here a little bit. You want to have your clutch turned off. That'll make it easier to get this chain to feed down through there. This would have been easier to do with the back wheel off. We're not going to remove the wheel just to install this chain. So we're going to push that down through there, pick that up over the top of the wheel, and then there's a little tab right here that we need to go above the tab. You can't see the tab, but there is a little tab right there. I want to go above there. And then over the top wheels, or the back wheel at the top of the back wheel, the lower jockey wheel. Pull that out. Get my new connector links. Again, don't reuse these. You should put a new one in anytime that you're taking your chain apart. Put one through the back, one through the front, rather the front and the back. And then I'm going to unhook this since there's no derailleur to worry about. This will make this a little easier. Take those two units, you overlap them, and then just pull. Once they're overlapped and they pop into place, and just pull them gently so that they stay in place. Push this forward, put this back on here. If you don't have the proper tool, there's actually a tool that you squeeze and then that pops them back together. If you don't have that, an easy way to do this is just wrap this up around gently through the derailleur. It's going to jump through the derailleur jockey wheel sometimes and over the cassette. And now my link is on the top here. If I hold my back brake and I press down, it will snap right into place. You can hear that audible lock there. Okay, so there you have it. We've taken apart the linkage, we've replaced the bearings, we've put it back together. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove the front shock. I'm going to service the front shock. Then I'm going to install the front wheel, adjust the front brake, take the bike for a little test ride, and give the customer a call. Thank you so much for watching and enjoy the ride.